name is Shaquelia Holmes. I'm a Writing Through Civics teacher. Freedom, democracy, and citizenship all play a role because as a citizen, you're guaranteed the right to have freedom. But unfortunately, every citizen does not have equal access. So sometimes we have to fight to be treated equally and for our freedom. And if at any time a student or anyone in America sees that they don't have the right, I think if they see something, they should say something, they should speak up, and they should go out and fight for what's right.
I am a social studies teacher, and I'm a lawyer. So it's no surprise I've been calling for civics curricula for decades. But in the wake of the January 6th insurrection, I have rededicated myself to this cause. The need for civic education and participation could not be clearer. Young people learn how to be citizens in a democracy by actually engaging in the work of citizenship, examining an issue that is important in their own lives, studying what different parts of government and civil society can do to address it, and advocating for policies to make change.
When we look at all of the unrest in our society today, and in the communities our students live in, violence, racial injustice, human rights violations, these lessons are the tools that students are going to need to be able to be defenders of democracy and human rights in their own communities.
Here in New York City, we have a working group of teachers thinking about how to make meaningful civic learning experiences accessible to all of our children.
Solar panels, and so we're not using any fossil fuels or anything. It's all coming from the sun.
For kids to think about civics from the point of view of their neighbors and people around them who are working together to make positive change happen.
Looking at propaganda, particularly World War II and Nazi propaganda, and sort of the thought process behind how do we move a public to change its perspective? How do we bring people to incredible violence? That does show them the power of these tools, and that they're still tools that exist today, and they can be used for good or for destruction, and that part of the responsibility of being civic-minded young adults is to be aware when these things are being used to manipulate their own interests.
I question America.
We need to use these types of lessons to teach our students that freedom, citizenship, and voting is really what gives them the power and the voices to speak up and speak out about what's affecting them every day.
To encourage our students to exercise their rights as American citizens, to go out and vote if they were old enough, to encourage those in their community and families to vote, to be engaged in the political process. No age is too young to go out there and get involved.
At least 5 Republican-led states have now officially banned the theory from public education.
Teachers give our students the opportunity to understand the full breadth and depth of the American society. And that is about the inception of this country, our Constitution, Jim Crow laws. It's about the beautiful inventions that we've had, and it spans across the diaspora and in any demographic divide that we may have.
If we have a freedom to teach a factual version of oppression in America and really are teaching civics in a holistic way so that kids can discern fact from fiction and that they can know history with all its complications, I think that we will be the better for that.
I have watched the same states who are trying to suppress the vote also trying to silence what we as social studies teachers try to teach our children. This is a fight for our democracy.
Hi, I'm Tia Costello from Amesbury, Massachusetts, and I teach 8th grade civics at Amesbury Middle School. For several years, I had been teaching 6th grade classical history, but in 2019, Massachusetts mandated that all 8th grade students receive a full year of civics instruction, and that was something I just had to be a part of. So I requested a move to 8th grade for 2 reasons. First, I wanted to follow my passion and teach students what I consider to be the most important thing to be learned: how to be thoughtful, active participants in our constitutional democracy. Secondly, was that I believed that it's important for teachers of civics to have that passion, to teach dynamically, and to encourage, not shy away from, student participation. I believe that learning civics needs to be experiential. Kids not only need to learn the history of how our democracy works, but they also need to practice participating in that democracy. They need to practice civic and civil dialogue. They need to experience how to affect change. And importantly, they need to learn how to think critically about what they hear, see, and read. They need this practice in order to feel comfortable, confident, and ready for when it's their turn to vote and lead our nation. I feel so passionately about this that I joined the AFT Civics design team to create professional development so that all teachers can feel comfortable and passionate about civics instruction. I'm excited that AFT and other organizations are pushing for increased funding for civics instruction. Without it, we could lose the one thing that truly makes us all Americans.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to our Teach Conference. We had a big day yesterday with Dr. Jill Biden in the morning at a Washington, D.C. school, and I hope if you haven't seen her presentation to us, it's a video on the website. And then last night, we had a really important conversation with Professor Kendi and with our Secretary-Treasurer, Fed Ingram. And then you just heard from Tia Costello, who is following her passion to teach 8th grade civics at Amesbury Middle School in Massachusetts. And I'm so, look, I'm just beaming with pride about our members and how so many of them have become activists in the, not just the journey for justice, but to help all of our kids succeed and grow and thrive. They rock. And those of you who are part and parcel of this Teach Conference and taking all these seminars and webinars, you know, as I said to the head of our Ed Issues department several weeks ago, I was nervous about, and that's Marla Uccelli-Kashup, for those who know her well, I was nervous about whether or not we could pull this off, a professional development conference with so many different strands and seminars and webinars, and then doing some stuff on the main stage. I really was nervous that we could pull it off virtually, but our Ed Issues department and Share My Lesson have been really wonderful, and I know they're back here somewhere, and I just really want to say to Marla and to her team, thank you very much, and also to the AFT team who has been here, and the team at this studio. The studio is called Freeman. I want to say to all of them, thank you very much for helping us pull this off and be really connected to our members and to educators all across the country. And now we're going into something that is my passion, and I am so grateful that we have these two amazing people who I'm about to introduce, who I get to do a little bit of a fireside chat with, meaning I get to ask them a lot of questions and they're going to answer them for all of you. And this is about the issue of American democracy. So the AFT has been committed to American democracy from the first days that the AFT has been in existence. In fact, our founding slogan was democracy in education and education for democracy. And I want to be clear, that dedication to democracy is not about politics. It's about who we are as a country. Yes, of course, we fight within the democracy for the policies and try to elect the people we believe will help make America better. And that's why we get involved in campaigns and elections, and then after elections really push to get things like the American Rescue Plan that was just passed and one of the first things that President Joe Biden did. But the concept of democracy is older than the concept of America. It goes back to the Greek concept of a voice for the people. It goes hand in hand as well with the fundamental idea that we have as trade unionists of having a voice at work, a voice in how we're governed, a voice in work. So my passion for democracy, for government, and for the political process has been lifelong. And, from days when I ran for student government, sometimes winning, sometimes losing. But turning that passion into student engagement was something that I was honored to do, not when I was a student, but when I was a teacher in the classrooms of Clara Barton High School in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, where I had the honor to teach street law and AP government and and U.S. government and Regents courses, but my love was teaching civics. And today, civics is more than a personal passion, obviously. It's a dire necessity. We're witness to widespread attacks on the right to vote and the most serious threats to our democracy in our lifetime. Frankly, I was glad to be earlier today, with Vice President Kamala Harris at Howard University, who talked eloquently about the right to vote and of protecting that right to vote and about making sure that our votes count and about making sure that everyone should have the responsibility to vote and to vote like they do in other countries like Australia. I've watched with alarm as these threats against voting have proliferated and reached the highest level of government all across the country. Look what's happening, for example, in Arizona. But it's clear that civic responsibility and our teaching about civic responsibility is essential right now. Because more than ever, young people need skills to be better consumers of information. They need to understand what's happening with disinformation. They need to have the muscle of being able to analyze that, like the new national study by researchers at Stanford University, which I spoke about in my speech a few days ago, showed. It showed this alarming inability by high school students to detect fake news, suggesting that we need to better prepare students for this world filled with a continued flow of disinformation. Critical thinking, being able to discern fact from fiction is crucial to being an informed citizen. Being able to understand fact, being able to examine differing viewpoints and getting to and arriving at one's own conclusion, that's part of who we are as teachers to our students. Today, teaching civics is vital to ensuring that our democracy in America survives and to ensuring that students see themselves as having a role and a voice in our country, that they see their own agency. It's how we provide a counter to the propaganda and the noise that permeates our political culture. It's how we lay the groundwork for a future generation that's engaged, that's informed, and that's empowered to continue what is the ever-evolving American experiment. So the skills our students need today to be responsible democratic citizens, yes, they are different than they were even 20 years ago. As I talked about in that Stanford study, sorry that I keep on focusing on it, but when only 3 of nearly 3,000 students can find that the source of a doctored video claiming to show illegal balloting during a Democratic primary was really from Russia, false information is insidious and it moves quickly. We need to counter that. Our kids need to learn to think critically and to acquire the skills to determine truth from fiction just as fast. So today, we're going to talk about all of that with 2 experts. Why it's so critical that all teachers, especially civics teachers, have the freedom to teach and engage their kids in meaningful, memorable lessons about the world we live in. Our democracy depends on an informed citizenry. And so today, we really are fortunate to be joined by 2 people who are on the forefront of these issues and of defending and pushing for and pressing for the best democracy that we can have. And first is the former Georgia House Speaker and gubernatorial candidate, Stacey Abrams. I'm so excited that both Stacey and Danielle are with us. Stacey, after witnessing, you all remember how she witnessed this, but after witnessing the gross mismanagement of the 2018 Georgia gubernatorial election, Stacey founded Fair Fight to ensure that every American has a voice in our election system. She's also founded multiple organizations devoted to voting rights, training and hiring young people of color, tackling social issues all over the place. And I don't know how she does this. She's an accomplished novelist. And then there's Danielle Allen, who every time I speak to Danielle, I feel like I am schooled in profound ways. Danielle founded the Democratic Knowledge Project Design Studio at Harvard University. The Democratic Knowledge Project worked to strengthen civic education, and the Design Studio now supports the Democratic Knowledge Project's K-12 civic education work. I know that's a mouthful, but it means that she, in plain English, knows what she is talking about and deeply rooted in civic education. She also co-chaired the Bipartisan Commission on the Practice of Democratic Citizenship of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Danielle has a lifelong passion for this work and is one of the most thoughtful social and civil justice warriors out there and thought leaders out there. She's devoted her personal and professional life to lending her voice to these issues and to helping all of our communities be more fair for everyone. So I just want to say to both of you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Randi. Great to be here.
Thank you, Danielle. And thank you, Stacy. So I'm gonna, I know that we're doing this on Zoom. I know there's a little bit of a delay. So I'm gonna start with Danielle, and then I'm gonna go to Stacy, and then I'm gonna do Danielle and Stacy, and then I'm gonna see if I have time for a couple of last questions for both of you, if that's okay. And I wanna start with you, Danielle, and just ask the following. Look, young people learn best how to be citizens in democracy by actually engaging in the work of citizenship, examining issues that are important in their own lives, studying what different parts of government and civil society can do to address them, and advocating to make change. So, you and I have talked about that for a long time. What do we then do when we have laws like the one just signed in Texas by Governor Abbott that targets and tries to stop these important parts of action civics, such as, and their new law prohibits students from learning how to advocate for policies they support? How do we teach about democratic citizenship when democracy is at risk, when this political polarization basically is stopping us from doing the kind of action civics we know is necessary?
Thank you, Randi. Thank you for all of your important work and leadership in this space. And we are at a critical moment. It's true that our democracy is at stake, and civic education is an important part of that. We have to start by recognizing that civic education isn't for red America or blue America. Civic education is for all of America. Just as you made that fundamental point, you can't have a democracy unless the people want it, understand it, know how to take their own rights and ownership in it as members, participants, people who belong in our democracy. Civic education supports all of that. It should support that for all our kids and learners. Democracy also depends on free thinking. We have to have our own reflection, our own intellectual power that we can bring to bear on decisions for our community. So at the end of the day, we have to build big coalitions of people from across political points of view that recognize that civic education is for everybody. Its purpose is to support people becoming participants, and that requires intellectual freedom. And we need to form those coalitions and carry that message to every state house that is forgetting these basic lessons of what democracy is and why it matters to us.
Thank you so much, Danielle. And as I've said to the audience who's zooming in and listening, whether they're on YouTube or Facebook or our platform, that's what we so admire you for being able to create and help create these coalitions across the political spectrum. And we are going to need to do this more and more and more. So Stacy, when I was teaching civics to juniors and seniors, meaning juniors and seniors in high school, you know, we would talk in the abstract about how democratic citizenship is essential to preserving and nurturing democracy, and would immediately get to voting. And how voting, my words, not my kids, is a sacred right and a sacred responsibility for every citizen. And that the government's job should be to promote the broadest involvement of citizenry in elections. Now, and you know, you speak about this more eloquently than anyone I know, frankly, everything seems to be viewed through a political lens and through this polarization. And so even after last year, when we had more people vote in America during a pandemic than ever before and had greater voter access, now what's happening is that we're having less and less voter access, and voting access seems to be a political issue, not a democracy issue. So the question I have for you is that how can we break through on this? How can we teach the importance of robust voter access for everyone? And how can we teach about the dangers of voter suppression in this age of political polarization? How do we find a way to make this, both access and counting, an issue of the common good?
I would start by saying that the challenge we face in our country is that we have decoupled democracy from how the world works. We've learned to enjoy the perquisites of democracy: running water, having roads and bridges, having educators. We've connected those dots, but we've forgotten that the fulcrum around which they operate is our democracy. And you'll hear this pushback when you talk about democracy from those who are deeply dismayed by that notion, who quickly correct and say, no, we're not a democracy, we're a republic. And one of the most important pieces and facets of our educational system is making certain we understand that the mechanism through which we make the choices that allow our republic to exist is our practice of democracy. So that's the macro conversation. When you bring it into where we are today, we've allowed the most recent examples of voter suppression, this removal of access, this restriction on who can vote. We've allowed it to become a partisan argument because the way our nation is broken down politically is that there's one group that has benefited from lack of access and another group that is harmed by that lack of access. The group that's harmed tends to vote one way, and the group that enjoys access unfettered tends to vote a different way. Our responsibility is to make certain that we take it outside of a conversation of partisanship and remind people that this is a perquisite of citizenship. And the way we do that is by connecting the dots between what we vote for, who we vote for, and what we get. The American Rescue Plan is a perfect example. There is no democratic line of recipients who get access to all of these dollars that are coming down the pike. We're not asking children if they are Democrats or Republicans, Libertarians or Green Party when the child tax credit is being deployed. It's going to lift half of the children in poverty out of poverty without regard to their family's partisanship. It is a function of citizenship that we voted in to office people who thought that the response to a pandemic was to provide support and investment in our kids. And so part of what we try to do in the work that I do and the groups I start is that we don't ask people who they want to vote for. We ask, what do you want to vote for? Who serves you depends on what you need. And the moment we start to return to why we let this system, govern who we are, it's because we want to have a say in what we get. We have to stop allowing this conversation to be polarizing and really use it as a patriotism conversation. Right. And so it is so important to me. When I challenged the voter suppression issues in the state of Georgia in 2018, I often lifted up Dan Gassaway, who was a Republican who served in the House with me. And the broken nature of our democracy meant that there were thousands of people who did not get to vote for him because of a flaw in how the process was run. This was not about partisanship. What hurt me hurt him. But more importantly, what hurt voters who wanted to vote for me hurt voters who wanted to vote for him. And more importantly, it hurt voters who didn't want to vote for me and voters who didn't want to vote for him. The moment we recognize that when you break democracy, you break it for everyone, is the moment we leave behind the partisanship veil that we like to hide behind, and we return to the question of what kind of society do we want to have and who should be allowed to participate. And there are rarely people who would say they don't want to be the ones who get to participate. They may opt not to, but they believe they should be able to. And when we return the conversation to access as a point of privilege of citizenship and make it less about the politicians who get elected from that, we get back to the place where patriotism and citizenship is the conversation about voter access and not the partisanship that unfortunately gets to hijack the conversation.
So what I also hear you saying is we got to start using more and more. Sorry, I keep on taking notes as I'm talking to both of you. We have to start talking more and more about citizenship. And we have to find ways, maybe we need the Ad Council and others to do what, they used to do. Find ways to actually advertise in a very nonpartisan way about the importance of voting and access to voting, and this is a patriotic component of citizenship. We're gonna do that in the AFT. We're gonna push that at the AFT. I wanna ask a couple of other questions. One which is a bit controversial, Danielle, which is, because of all of the conversations right now over something we actually don't teach in K through 12, which is CRT, which is critical race theory. But the moment you talk about anything that involves race, slavery, racism, discrimination, all of a sudden the knives seem to be out about what we are and are not teaching in K-12. So I'm going to start this by saying your book, Our Declaration, or in your book, Our Declaration, you discuss the principles of liberty, equality, and the democracy that are embedded in the Declaration of Independence, and the fact that many of its signers, take the main author, Thomas Jefferson, owned slaves, owned human beings, and that slavery is not incidental to our history. It is part and parcel of our history. And today, there are many who basically want to ignore, pass over slavery and its legacy. And that is essentially what is confronting K-12 teachers as they come back to schools in August and September. So, I did a major speech on this a couple of days ago, and I said we will obviously defend our members who are engaged in the teaching of honest history. But what advice do you have for teachers who are listening to us on how they approach these questions?
Thank you, Randi. This is so important. And the first thing I want to say is less advice than just to remind people how important the work is that you're doing as an educator. When I was a kid in school, I used to ask my teachers what the experiences were like, what life was like for people who were enslaved. And my teachers were wonderful, wonderful people. I was so blessed by all of them. To a person, they all gave me the same answer. We can't know that. There weren't enough written records. We don't have those histories. And one of the great joys of my lifetime, just about 50 years of being on this planet, is that over the course of these 50 years, historians have done extraordinary work to reconstruct the record and to learn what people did experience who were enslaved, to see how they lifted their voices to fight the experience of enslavement, to see how they brought transformation. We have all that knowledge now. For the first time in our country's history, it is possible for us to tell complete and honest histories, the good and the bad, to bring those pieces together, to understand the moment of revolution from the perspective of, yes, people who held property, including property in other human beings, also from the perspective of those human beings who were held as property, from the perspective of women, from the perspective of Indigenous Americans, from the perspective of indentured Americans. And the job is to put those stories together. Now, that doesn't mean when we say that the stories are together, that it's a story of agreement. No, it's often a story of contestation and conflict and overcoming. But that is our American story. And so for every educator out there committed to telling that complete and honest story, I just want to let you know you are doing the good work. And we are with you. Those of us who are scholars toiling in the vineyards to bring facts to light, we are with you. Those of us who are defenders of freedom of speech and freedom of thought, we are with you. So again, I think this is a place where we need to build a coalition, but most importantly, people just need to know in their hearts that you are doing the good and right work to tell honest and complete histories of this country.
That's so, I hope the people who are listening, I hope they just take in what Danielle just said. I know it's going to be hard. I know people get brutalized on Twitter and Facebook, but it's so important for us to, as educators, to ensure that our students know our common history and that they can engage in that and have agency around that. So thank you, Danielle. Now, this question, Stacy, you and I have talked about this in so many different ways over the course of years. But I can't, I really want you to talk about the Grow a Voter Education Initiative, which is part of the All In for Voting campaign. I really want people to know, teachers to know, how they can be involved in these kind of campaigns that you have created, and it's just been, just in the last 2 years, the kind of work that Fair Fight and others have done. So, give us a sense from your perspective what you think the role is of teachers, maybe in the Grow a Voter campaign, maybe in the All In for Voting campaign, or just in general, what the role of teachers are in this fight to preserve and protect democracy.
I'm the daughter of two. So I'm the daughter of two civil rights activists, but my parents were activists as teenagers. My dad was arrested at the age of 14, registering Black people to vote in Hattiesburg, Mississippi in 1965. We tease him that my mom was doing the same work across town. She just managed not to get caught. And we talk about this because in my family, we grew up believing in the responsibility of voting, primarily because it was so hard won. But my parents never framed it in this, you owe us, you owe your history to vote. What they did was say, understand the history of voting and how hard it was to get it, and try to figure out why people made it so difficult for you to participate. If they don't want you to have it, you probably should want it more than you realize. But my parents also then made sure we spent time in soup kitchens and homeless shelters. We went to juvenile justice centers. We went to nursing homes. And my parents made certain that we understood that our presence there, we may have been there as volunteers, but we went home to a house that sometimes didn't have running water, sometimes didn't have electricity. And so it wasn't about us giving back that sort of notion of altruism. It was about, you need to understand the whole context, and you need to understand how these dots are connected. For educators, it's that connection of the dots that grows voters. Children know when things aren't right, and you all know that better than anyone. They know when something's unfair. They know when something should be done better. They know when something's hyper inefficient. They may not use that language, but they know there's a problem. And one of the best ways to grow a voter is to start early by connecting the dots so they understand what voting delivers. When I talk to young people, and this was an amazing year, let's realize that in 2020, 53% of 18 to 29-year-olds voted in America who were eligible to vote. That's the first time we've crossed the 50% mark since 1988. And that's an amazing thing. It's because these are young people who've grown up hearing about the things that needed to be done, and they've seen who was supposed to do it and who did or did not do it. So one part of growing a voter is making sure that they understand why we vote. It's not the act of casting a ballot, it's the act of creating change. So that's the first piece. The second is making sure they understand that their experience and their family's experience of voting is not transferable. I was so proud of the work that we were able to do with AFT through the All In for Voting campaign, because by explaining the history of voter suppression and its current iteration, people need to understand that while your family may make it through that voting line in 17 minutes, there are other families that stand in line for 7 hours. And you cannot base the success of our democracy on the easiest experience. We have to base it on the hardest experience. And so making sure, and this goes to Dr. Allen's point, making sure we're taking the time to explain and explicate how things work depending on who you are, depending on where you stand in our spaces, makes it easier for people to understand why they have to defend voting, not just for themselves, but for others. And then the third piece is that we've got to explain that voting is not magic. One of the worst ways to get people to vote is to tell them if you go and vote, the world changes. That is a bald-faced lie. I'm a politician. I was one. I may play one again. It doesn't work like that. And the minute we raise young people to believe that if they vote, things change, that first moment of disillusion is sometimes the most profound. And if we lose young voters, they do not return until there's something cataclysmic. And so part of it is saying it's not magic, it's medicine. It's the same reason you take your vitamins. It's the same reason when they tell you you've got a fever, you take aspirin. It's how we build our immune systems. It's how we build our capacity as a nation to get better and stronger. Because the thing of it is, if you refuse to take your medicine when you're sick, you will likely get worse, but even more concerning, a new disease might come and find you. And so if we frame voting as medicine, it's about making sure we stay as healthy as we can and we work towards getting healthier versus magic, which just makes it seem like it's one and done, then we get voters, especially young voters, to see that this is a lifetime of opportunity. It's not going to guarantee victory. It's not even going to guarantee progress. But sometimes our best bet is to not get worse. So it's connecting the dots. It's being clear about how difficult it may be for others and making sure that empathy is built into how we think about our democracy, and then making sure we're honest about what voting can and cannot deliver. If we do those things, we find not only new voters, but we find resilient voters who are more willing to participate when it works and when it doesn't.
That is great, great, great advice. I keep on thinking as both of you are answering questions, like how much of this we're going to put into lesson plans through Share My Lesson. And we just are so, again, so grateful to both of you. So I have two, if we have time, I'm just looking for my timekeepers here. I'm told we have time, great. I have two kind of questions for both of you. One I think we've actually dwelled on a little bit, which is I think it was Stacy who talked about how Ben Franklin talked about or the difference between a republic and a democracy. But Ben Franklin had this description of the American experiment in democratic government, or the democratic government that was created then, which was not a multiracial democracy, but a very limited one. But even then, it was quite an experiment. And he said, you got a republic if you can keep it. And, I think about that a lot right now, about, particularly what our role is as educators, both to educate but to also promote a republic and promote a democracy. So I'm, again, looking for both of you to give us a little bit of advice here that we can use in terms of what do you think educators need to do to keep our republic? Why don't I start with Danielle again, because of Zoom as opposed to us together, let me just start with Danielle and then I'll go to Stacy. And my next question, I'll start with Stacy and go to Danielle.
Alrighty, no, that sounds good. Well, first, I always have to jump into this debate about democracies and republics to make the point that actually both terms were used at the founding, both terms were embraced by different members of our founding generation. Alexander Hamilton referred to the new country as a representative democracy. Franklin, in that quote, used republic. So it's true that we've developed this kind of polarized view that a republic is about order and structure and constitutionalism, and democracy is about participation of the people and sort of popular sovereignty. Both ideas are really captured by the phrase constitutional democracy. So let me answer the question, Randi, of how educators can really help us secure our constitutional democracy.
Perfect.
So I think...
I just said perfect, thank you.
No, sure thing. You know, that's one of the bees in my bonnet. I'm always coming back to that one. But, you know, I think it is really this important work of making the point that we can think for ourselves. We Americans have to have faith in ourselves as a people who think, and a people who think and, just as Stacy said, connect the dots. And then as we connect the dots, we come to judgments about our community and how our communities are doing. And so that work of supporting the confidence of young learners in their own capacity to think for themselves, to connect the dots, to diagnose problems in their community and to find solutions. It really is a project of capacity building in each and every young learner, and the capacity to build is the capacity for self-government, the capacity for egalitarian participation with others in collective decision-making. And I believe if we can really instill that self-confidence, instill that understanding in young people that their thoughts, their voice matter, we will build that coalition of people across contexts, across backgrounds, even across parties that will stand up and even to legislatures say, look, you know, we can think for ourselves. We do not need laws that are trying to tell us what curriculum should be like. We can think for ourselves, have faith in the American people. So in that regard, I think educators can embody faith in the American people by really cultivating that spirit of self-confidence in young learners.
So self-confidence and the muscle of critical thinking.
Yep, exactly.
Great. Stacy.
I would add to it the practical experience of participating in democracy. One of the pieces that I remember from second grade in just the second grade class was the first election I participated in. What the young woman who eventually became one of my best friends, she, railed against, or she was in favor of the guy running for president. I was in favor of the guy who was the president. And it was the only fight I ever got into in school. She threw a book at me. I threw a desk at her. I won. My candidate lost. And I never got into that kind of fight again. But I remembered for the rest of my life the importance of this debate that we had. And so often we relegate the conception of democracy and civics to only existing in classes designed for our participation. But this is an active responsibility that, to Danielle's point about the critical learning, it's also the critical experience. It's finding ways in every classroom to engage the conversation of participatory democracy, of making sure your voice is heard, of making decisions and having to deal with the consequences. And so I would challenge every teacher to think about how in your classroom, whether it's math or earth science, how do you take the larger construct of being able to vote, being able to decision make, being able to understand the consequences, how do you build it into your curriculum? Because the extent to which we relegate it to a narrow part of either an academic career or a part of our lives, we exempt ourselves from having to think about the through line. And my belief is that we have a more robust democracy, or a more robust constitutional democracy, when we are constantly engaged in the practice of democracy, constantly engaged in the practice of having to discuss our needs, debate the challenges, understand who might have conflicting views, and still having to come to resolution. And sometimes that resolution isn't what we want, but it's what serves the public best. And so I would just encourage us to move it outside of a singular or narrow universe of conversation and really embed it across how we train young people today to be active citizens.
Right. You know, part of what we have pressed the new Secretary of Education to do is to really have a task force on accountability and assessment so that we can start assessing and create accountability around what we want kids to know and be able to do, as opposed to this kind of narrow accountability around test scores. And I think that if we could do some of that, it will also kind of enable teachers that the kind of intellectual freedom that Danielle was talking about. We have to enable teachers to be able to, in all of the subject areas, really engage kids into the practice and exercise of participation. And whether it's participatory democracy or participation in classes, that they develop that muscle and that self-confidence in doing that. And that's part of what I'm hearing both of you say. That when they feel the self-confidence that they can speak in class and they can take risks, and they can try different things, and they can debate about ideas, you know, it shouldn't just be restricted to civics or to history classes. It has to be go throughout the curriculum and create that that self-confidence and that agency. So I have what is very predictable as one of my final questions, which is obviously thinking about, excuse me, what's happened right now in the aftermath of the 2020 election, that you know, there are many people who don't believe it was legitimate. And we've dwelled on it to some extent in terms of the new laws that are around and proposing voter suppression and restricting access. But I want to actually take it to a different level here. I want to ask both of you, how do we rebuild faith back into our civic institutions? We've talked a lot about long-term, what we do, like what you've done, Stacey, with the Grow Your Own Voters program, the All-In for Democracy programs. I know that, Danielle, you have done this so much in some of the K-12 civics programs that we've developed. But we're at a inflection point here, and so is there anything that we can do quickly, urgently, in terms of rebuilding faith in our civic institutions? And I'll start with Stacey.
Fast? No. Urgent? Yes.
Well, that's honest.
Yeah. But here's the thing. One, we have to remember or recognize that the rejection of the election on January 6th and the subsequent challenges we're seeing, they are very, very loosely tied to who won or lost in 2020 and 2021, but they are directly and inextricably linked to who showed up. We saw a sea change in the composition of our electorate, and it had an effect. And it's that challenge that is being leveraged to justify these new restrictions. The For the People Act, of which I'm a huge proponent, and any iteration that we can develop of it, essentially says that we need a fundamental baseline democracy so that your geography, your race, your ability does not determine the quality of your access. And that is urgent. And it cannot be elided, it cannot be delayed, because the extent to which our Constitution delegates to the states the ability to determine who can participate, if they dislike participation, they're going to constantly, essentially act against those who can participate. And we saw the Supreme Court last week with the Arizona decision reinforce this notion that it is the perquisite of the states to decide who gets to participate, and that as long as the laws look benign on their face, then it's okay if they have an impact on communities of color, on young people, on the disabled. That is anathema to who we are. And so our best bet is to pass S1, the For the People Act, and to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, and to recognize these are two separate yet equally important pieces. And I'll close with this. The For the People Act says that no matter where you live in America, we're going to guarantee that you have basic access to democracy. In some states, it'll be even better. In other states, you'll get just the basics, but that no one will go below that level, that floor that we set, that every state has to at least meet these requisites. The John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act says new bad can't happen. And as my friend Raphael Warnock has put it, we need the For the People Act to put out the fires that are being set right now, and we need the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act to start building the firehouse to stop the new ones as they come. If we do those two things with alacrity and intentionality, we can start to help preserve our democracy.
Thank you, Stacey. Danielle.
Well, I would endorse both of those things, and those are the near-term things that are right there now for people to work on and support. In addition, I think we really need to invest in our local journalism ecosystem. At the end of the day, if we want to fight the problem of disinformation and misinformation, we have to actually rebuild people's understanding of what counts as evidence-based journalism, what counts as investigative journalism, including around local issues. And there are experiments around the country right now. There's a great program in Lexington, Kentucky called Civic Lex, which is a real model. In New Bedford here in Massachusetts, we've got some interesting experiments underway. And around the country, we need to find and really support and scale up those people who are finding ways to restore a presence of local journalism. It is the sort of the vacuum of actual fact-based journalism throughout all the nooks and crannies of our decision-making structures in this country that have permitted misinformation and disinformation to just roll in and take over the space. So we need to claim space back for healthy discourse. I think it's another place where we need the medicine of constant work to give us our vitamins, our information vitamins on a regular basis, help us understand what a healthy standard is for an information ecosystem, and rebuild that. That is a critical support for all the access we should have through voting rights and for being able to deliver in our political system a positive, productive, healthy decision-making culture.
Wow. I know both of you for a long time, and you never cease to enlighten and educate me. And I'm just, as I'm sitting here furiously writing notes, I just can't imagine how grateful my members are who have watched this session. I just can't thank I can't thank both of you enough about this, and just the thoughtfulness and the generosity of spirit that you've given us, and your time that you've given all of us today. And for everyone who's been listening, it's so important to have discussions like this and make sure people understand not just what's happening in terms of democracy and civics, participation in the democracy, but all these other pieces and strands, like what Stacey just talked about in terms of what the S1, the We the People Act, as well as the John Lewis Act are attempting to correct, and what Danielle just talked about in terms of how important local journalism is to ensure that the facts are out there in ways that people trust, and how we counter misinformation and how important that is. The other piece was, Stacey, one of the things that you said that I think will stick with people so much, and Danielle just referred to it as well, was this whole notion about voting, and it is not magic, it's medicine. And that the notion that, just that there's going to be a magic wand just because people voted, that everything's going to change, that is never what happens in terms of America. And just kind of putting that pin in it and making sure that we understand that we, can't overpromise. I mean, lots of things get underdelivered, but we, as people who are engaged in this process, can't overpromise and pretend something that's not going to happen. Protecting our democratic principles, and both of you have said this, it's not partisan, it's patriotic. And our responsibility as citizens is not just to vote, as important as that is, and as important as that is as a voter and to register to vote, but it's also to stand up so that everyone who is eligible can vote and every vote is counted, and that when you're eligible to vote, it doesn't mean it's going to take 7 hours to vote. It means that you should be able to have that access freely and fairly. So I just want to say once again, thank you to both of you for being here today. We are really, 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 really grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Randi.
And with that, I have one more thing I have to do today, and one more introduction that I have to do, which is something that that most of the people who are watching this Zoom or watching Teach know. Elections do matter. And, even though it's not magic, and even though things don't change in a minute, there are real differences and there are real consequences about who is elected and what that means. Both Stacey Abrams and I talked about how the American Rescue Plan is a game changer in so many ways for people, and that happened just because President Biden, Joe Biden, was elected. And there's a lot of other things that have happened since Joe Biden is elected. We were with his wife, Lotus, the First Lady of the United States of America, yesterday at a school, Dr. Joe Biden, who has spent, decades teaching elementary and middle and high school and college kids. But it also is not just Joe Biden who knows how to walk in the shoes of educators and the challenges, as well as the, great, senses, when our kids do well or when we see the light bulb, how accomplished they feel and what that means for us. But it also means that we have a Secretary of Education who not only is an educator, Dr. Miguel Cardona, but who supports the work of educators and of public education and understands what it means and why. So let me just say, what a difference from Betsy DeVos. So Secretary Cardona and his staff are working with educators across the country to recover, to return, to reimagine public education, and to do lots of things, including how to deal with student debt and how to deal with lots of other aspects of what we need to do in education. I talked, several times already in this week about how we need to have a better accountability system, how it needs to align with what we need to do for kids and what they need to be able to achieve, how we need to get more funding for community schools, for Title I, how we need to actually double down on literacy. There's lots of things that we need in terms of having the tools and conditions to do our jobs so that we can help as best as we can, help all kids thrive and have every single school be a school, public school be a school that parents want to send their kids to and educators want to teach at, and ultimately the kids thrive. So Dr. Cardona has shared a special message for AFT educators, which you will see in a minute. And after we hear from Dr. Cardona, we also want to highlight a student, Victoria Wren, who is the founder of something called Stems and Buds, which is a program putting the lessons of civic education into practice by building a pipeline of civic, I can't say my C's today, of civic-minded STEM students who are committed to the public good through free chapters, camps, and other outreach programs. So let me end by saying to you tonight, look, I've said this over and over again, our members are amazing. And, you know, on top of being exhausted this whole year, you're doing all this professional development this week. So we'll see you tomorrow back here with our Executive Vice President, Evelyn DeJesus, and our guest, Dina Simmons. We'll see you on Saturday with a special Q&A that both our Executive Vice President, Evelyn DeJesus, is doing, and our Secretary-Treasurer, Fed Ingram, is doing with the new Deputy Secretary of Education, Cindy Martin. But before you sign off, take a look at these amazing videos and just thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Miguel Cardona, U.S. Secretary of Education. Thank you, AFT, for inviting me to share a few words at your Teach Conference. I applaud each and every one of you for your continued service as educators and paraprofessionals. Thank you for the work you do every day in our schools. As an educator and father, I know this has been a year like no other. I'm inspired by the educators and paraprofessionals who continue to serve our communities throughout this challenging time, as we seek to reemerge from this global pandemic even stronger than we were before. While dealing with the impact of COVID on your own lives, you still centered the needs of your students. I'm grateful for your leadership and for your service. As we look ahead to the summer and fall, AFT members are continuing to channel that same resourcefulness, resilience, and dedication to serving students. I'd like to give a special shout out to AFT for launching the Back to School for Everyone national campaign to connect with educators, school staff, and communities. This grassroots campaign will communicate the importance of in-person learning while building families' trust and confidence in their children returning to school. You are the best messengers in your own communities. Your voices will help get all students back into the classroom this fall, where we know they can once again build the vital, nurturing relationships with educators and peers in school that matter so much to their learning and to their growth. I'm also proud that the federal government, under the Biden-Harris administration, has provided unprecedented resources to support students and educators in reopening schools for in-person learning and rebuilding our education system stronger and more equitable than it was before the pandemic. With $130 billion from the American Rescue Plan to reopen our K-12 schools, and historic proposals like the American Families Plan, which will allow us to address long-standing gaps in our educational opportunities, this is our moment, educators. It's our moment to make the education system work for all students and all educators. And beyond recovery, let's commit to moving forward together. We must take bold action to ensure equitable opportunities for all students. We must bridge gaps exacerbated by the pandemic and provide the necessary supports and resources to students so that lifelong learning could be the expectation, not the exception. We must create stronger connections among sectors in education, from early education to K-12 to higher education, so that students experience their learning as a continuum. And so that, as educators, we're all learning from each other to better serve our students. I call on you to be leaders who bring vision and hope to your communities, changing systems to make them work for all learners. But remember, we cannot spark transformative change if we're burnt out. So I encourage you to take some time this summer to rest, to recharge and re-energize for the upcoming school year. Our students and their families need you at their best. And this upcoming year will be a year of transformation, not only for our students, but for our systems. Finally, I invite you and your families to get vaccinated against COVID-19 this summer. Getting vaccinated is one of the most important things you can do to stop the spread of the virus, to keep your community safe, and to get kids back into school full-time. With intentional collaboration, we can build back better than before and make the future brighter for all of our students. Thank you, and have a wonderful conference.
Hi everyone, my name is Victoria Wren. I'm a rising senior in Pittsburgh and the founder of STEM and Buds, a for youth by youth education nonprofit centered around STEM x civics. At STEM and Buds, we build educational environments centered around 1, peer mentorship to amplify all voices, and 2, individualized project creation to encourage intersectional initiative through after-school chapters, summer camps, and outreach programs. We believe every kid should not only be able to pursue project-based learning reflective of their identity and interests, but also have a strong community of mentors and friends while doing so. So STEM and Buds began a little over 3 years ago when a friend and I met at a speech and debate summer camp. We realized that aspects of the speech community, like peer mentorship that made it more accessible and inclusive, were missing from the scientific community. So after researching, talking, and prototyping for a few months, STEM and Buds began as 2 13 and 14-year-olds recruiting friends for an after-school club at a neighboring district. Today, we're really lucky to have a team over 100 student leaders directly engaging over 3,500 students and mentors. This past year with COVID and virtual learning, we've been reminded of the importance of student-centered education and readily adapting to each student's unique needs. Now, each of our programs are coupled with optional sessions like STEM tutoring sessions or scientific terminology toolkits for ESL students, so every kid feels supported. And whether our work is virtual or not, our ultimate vision is building a pipeline of civically minded STEM students committed to social good. Our chapter curriculum is localized, covering community-based issues while developing leadership and social innovation skills. Our mentorship structure is sustained, where we host regular team bonding activities and check-ins well after the programs are over. And so many times, the students we work with and train are committed to STEM and Buds, and they become our next mentors, regional directors, and even members of our executive team. I feel incredibly grateful to be able to do this work and be able to share it here with everyone today. So for more information, check out stemandbuds.org, and please feel free to reach out anytime. Thank you for doing all that you've done this past year and supporting students like me. We appreciate it.